welcome everyone to the spiritual discussion tonight. We're talking about what the church should do, what the church is doing, and what we think the church should be doing. Welcome my guests, Anti-Trekker Michael Crawford, the Ambassador, and Rambling Canuck. Hello, guys.
Right.
Good evening.
I got to ask you, Mr. CCDV, are you a Methodist by chance?
No, actually, I grew up Pentecostal.
The only reason I ask is because, man, I have never seen anyone as strict to a timetable as you on YouTube. You guys missed it. We were in the middle of this lively argument over Star Trek, and then he's just like, "We're starting in 3 seconds," and it was like, "What?"
I will say this for Mr.
I will give it. He's punctual. He's punctual.
Yes,
and I will be late to my own damn funeral, and I make no bones about it.
Yeah. I will say this for Mr. CC. He runs a tight ship, much as I do, so I respect that. And fun fact, Anti-Trekker, I am a Methodist, actually.
Okay, well, then you understand what I'm saying, then. Because Methodists will start church exactly at 9 o'clock, and they will be done at exactly 10:15, and they will not stray 1 minute. And they have...
the church... We start church at the normal time, 10:30. We like our congregants to be somewhat awake, unlike you, unlike some other congregations.
Well, it varies from church to church, though. You know, there are Methodist churches that start at 9. There's some who start at 10:30. But the thing is that they are a lot of people don't even realize that the reason that the Methodist Church is called the Methodist Church is because John Wesley had a method to how service was to be performed, and they were literally named Methodists after that method.
I have attended churches all over the world, and trust me, I know there are many different congregations that start at many different times.
Yep. And some churches, you know, when like you say you were Pentecostal, a lot of Pentecostal churches, we're just going to go as long as the Spirit leads us. Right?
Yep. I've been there a long time.
I'm going to say this. I dabbled in the Pentecostal church for a little while. I actually have family members who I love dearly. We all get along. But I did dabble in Pentecostalism for a little while. I like structure. For me, structure is good.
Pentecostal is definitely a free form kind of thing. Yeah, you don't.
I don't mind. I don't mind if things get a little respectfully rowdy in the church.
You might appreciate like a Foursquare church.
And I would like to welcome Darth Revan, V-Star.
It's pronounced Revan.
It's
pronounced Revan.
Darth Revan, V-Star, and Jedi Bill. Thank you guys for joining us.
Don't make me revoke your nerd card. I'll do it.
Give up.
Crazy Irishman works too.
Yeah, I just call Crazy Irishman.
Crazy Irishman works. It works.
I revoked DJ Odyssey's nerd card last week.
I lose my nerd card all the time.
Yeah, but when I take it, it's permanent because I exercise ambassadorial authority.
Ambassadorial. Diplomatic immunity.
It's just been revoked.
Fine. I'll just be a normie who likes weird sci-fi stuff.
Okay.
But
back on topic.
This week's topic is what should the church be doing? What we think the church should be doing, and what is the church doing? Because the last time we did this stream, it was what is the church doing wrong?
Don't say wrong.
Wong, yes. What was
did you ever fix that?
No, I never did. I figured it'd be fun.
What, did it say Wong in the title?
Yeah.
It did.
Oh. It's not that hard.
He went the wrong way.
So not Doctor Strange's sidekick.
Cece, it's not that hard. You go into the studio, you edit the title, and you put an R in there. It's not that hard.
So, for the first topic, what is the church doing right? Anti-Trekker.
You didn't put it in as white?
I did not put it in as white. I guarantee you that. Actually,
well, we don't want to be.
Yeah, you guarantee it that we don't.
I put it incorrectly. Woo!
Honestly,
Right.
I think like in our current state of affairs, I mean, the world is a little bit on the crazy side right now,
Crazy?
and yeah, and I think honestly, and this might sound a little weird, but at least this is something that I'm seeing, is that the church is doing a good job at attempting, not necessarily succeeding, but attempting to get people to understand that we as believers are not to give in to just plain old fear. That we're supposed to be, this is the time to hold steadfast in our faith. And this is the time that we'll test it. This is, obviously you look on the news any day and boy, it just seems like the world is literally on fire. But
Yeah.
and I'm not talking about any particular denomination. I see this across the board where churches are doing everything they can to try and encourage people in their faith, to make them understand that, you know what, God is in control. It may not feel like it from our perspective, but He is. It's okay. And as one pastor friend of mine used to say, God does not say oops.
Right.
No. Well, and something that I saw in my area where I live here in Indiana, a lot of the churches, they almost, okay, not almost, but they did in a lot of ways. They formed a coalition, and they said, we can't do worship in the traditional sense, but we still have this message. What can we do to get it out to the communities in which we exist? And a lot of them did this exceedingly well, and it's even carrying through now. I have seen churches from very drastically different denominational boundaries cross those boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And even just, from the Protestant to the Catholic, crossing that line. But also from within the Protestant, all the different denominations they're crossing that line. They're reaching across the aisle quite literally and saying, we all share this. We all share the same faith. What can we do for our communities to let them know and to know that there is hope? And what can we do to encourage them?
Yes.
The
ecumenical cooperation has become outstanding recently.
Well, and I hate to say this, but the only reason one of the main reasons why it has is because of the virus. Churches got closed down for months. We didn't get to do Easter in the normal way that we would normally do Easter.
Right.
But I would love to see, honestly, that movement broaden and everything across even state lines, to reach across international borders as much as possible. I know, considering with all the travel restrictions, but do it virtually. The church has that capacity now, and that's one of the things that the church is doing. They are taking advantage of all the technological advancements that they have at their fingertips.
Right. Our church, we were talking about this before the stream. Our church, obviously in the state that I live in, we have a mask order from the state. Mm-hmm. And so our church is compliant with that, because one thing that our pastor says, and I agree with him on this, is that it is our duty as Christians to set an example for our community. We're not going to be rebellious and say we're not going to put masks on because we're God will protect us or something. No, you know what? The state says put a mask on. We're going to put a mask on.
Exactly.
And besides that, our church has then, and our pastor said, look, we understand some of you don't want to put masks on. That's perfectly okay. Some of you are high risk and you don't feel comfortable coming to church. That's perfectly okay. Guess what? If you've got Facebook, we're streaming. If you've got YouTube, we're streaming. And something that we didn't do up until very recently is we're streaming all of our services now. We have 4 services each weekend, and all 4 services are live streaming. And we were doing that when the full-out lockdown was in place and nobody could be at the church. And so then the worship team still went there and performed, and the pastor still got up on the stage and preached, but he always would start out saying how weird it feels to be preaching to an empty room. But they would record it and put it online, and we're still doing that. And it's funny because, like, on the occasion where if I'm stuck at work late or something, so I can't go, and I'll put on the live stream right after work, and then I'll see my son's head in the front row where he always sits, and it's just kind of, we still have that ability to connect like never before. If this were the 1917 flu, guess what? You just wouldn't be able to go to church and get anything out of church, and now
Exactly.
we can.
Yeah, exactly.
Rambling Canuck, you got something to say?
Well, for me, I think when you look at the question, what is the church doing right? Honestly, I've always found that most of the time, if you want to see church done right, you go to the smallest church you can find. Because I find that the bigger the church, sometimes the more chances are that you're going to find problems where you have your smaller churches, and I don't know if that's the same down in the States, but up here, for the most part, your smaller churches are the ones that have the food banks. Your smaller churches are the ones that are doing the outreaches, and your bigger churches that have a name and a reputation to uphold, shall we say, are the ones that do the, we have a dress code, so you can't enter, which is what we talked about last week and stuff like that. And so for me, I've always found that, the church that I have here is a big building. However, the community within that church is small.
But I think what's interesting about that is that it's almost like we talk about power corrupts absolutely. I think there's a certain truth that success corrupts, and this is something that you see, in cliques that form on YouTube, like some of the garbage that I've been talking about this week. We see it in politics. We see it in almost every type of organization. And yes, unfortunately, we do see that sometimes in the churches. But I also like the fact that there are exceptions to that rule.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I've got an article pulled up on the Saddleback Church. The pastor of the Saddleback Church is Rick Warren, and he wrote the book Purpose-Filled Life, or Purpose-Driven Life. Thank you.
Yeah.
He doesn't take a dime as senior pastor. He doesn't take a dime from the church. All of his money comes from his book sales. And so when he founded the church, it was a matter of, okay, we're in a living room right now, and we're just going to go ahead and start giving all our money away. And it's been 30 years, and he's still doing exactly the same thing. They just started a new program where they intend to give $71 million over the next 3 years to charitable organizations. So the church is still doing the same thing, even though when you walk in there, it's like, oh, is this a shopping mall? No, it's a church. But they're still giving away millions of dollars a year to charitable organizations. And so this is one of the churches that I think is doing the right thing. Are there mega churches out there that are still taking money from people and not giving it out? Of course there are.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's one that I heard of, and y'all may have heard of it as well. Willow Creek Church up in the suburbs of Chicago and everything, but it used to be headed by Bill Hybels or anything. And I've read several of his books and everything, and I have some of them still. And his church, they have done a lot of outreach there in the area in which they exist. And I would say, along with Saddleback, they're one of the good examples of I guess you could call it a mega church, for lack of a better term, that they're trying to make a difference in the community in which they exist. And that's to be that's I don't want to say it be applauded, but it should be pointed out and say this is an example of a church that's got it right.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, and I'll brag on the church that I go to. I mean, it's definitely not a mega church, but the Experience Community, the church that I go to, is I believe it's now the second largest church in the city I'm in. And we have before COVID hit, we were having about 5,000 people a weekend come into services. And which is like pales to compare to a church the size of Saddleback, but it's a pretty, obviously in the upper echelon of church size.
mm-hmm.
And one thing that our church has always done, now our pastor does draw a salary, he doesn't write books, but he makes, I believe last time he said it's something like 42,000 a year. And he's like the highest paid person on the payroll.
Yeah.
And so nobody's getting rich working at our church. And by the way, last year they added health care to it.
Just last year.
Last year, yes. And so it's not like, he's not doing it for the money, obviously. Our church's budget, no matter what happens, we have it's written into our bylaws, 20% off the top goes to support local 501c3s in the greater metro area of our city. And then after that, we support 3 churches in New England. We also support an orphanage in Uganda and stuff like that. And then of course, there's benevolence and stuff. And we're not putting a bunch of money into a big building or something like that. We're basically trying to pump everything we can into helping the community.
And it does. There's something in Scripture that says those that work for the church can't or shouldn't make a living and anything, or have a living wage or anything for their efforts. At least to the best of my knowledge, and I've studied Scripture pretty rigorously.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea of the pastor drawing a salary, that's not an issue for me or anything. Mm-hmm. The only ones I will point a finger at and say they are hypocrites are fairly obvious. One is Kenneth Copeland and the other one is Joel Osteen. Those two are about the biggest shysters. Those two are about the biggest shysters I don't even call them pastors.
I think what we see, and I think it is fairly obvious when you see a pastor who is just making an exorbitant amount of money. Mm-hmm. And honestly, what bothers me even more than the Joel Osteens of the world is when you have a small church in a small, usually economically depressed neighborhood where those people are faithfully giving to that church, and then you see the pastor of the church rolling up in a Cadillac with a gold ring on every finger with a bunch of chains on them, and the people that attend that church are sold on this idea that that's how the pastor should be.
Yes.
That is somehow that your church just isn't, really being a truly faithful church unless your pastor is living an extravagant lifestyle. And that to me, to shame on that pastor for letting your flock believe that. And,
or encouraging your flock to believe that.
Right. It's that to me is horrible. But when you have pastors that do live a genuine, humble lifestyle, despite the fact that they could make a lot more, like a church, I know I like to brag on Corey, the pastor of our church, but it's mainly because, I just love the guy to death. He, a church our size, typically the pastor would be making somewhere in the mid to high 6 figures. And for him to be making $42,000 in a church the size of ours is unheard of. And I truly appreciate that. I love the fact that he's not interested in, he lives in a modest home. I've seen his house. It's like, my house, quite frankly, is a nicer home than his. And he's doesn't drive a new car. His current vehicle is I think it's like a 2006 RAV4. And when it dies, he'll get another car similarly old. That's what he does. And you know, he's not interested in having all the material stuff. He gets it. And that's something, and he tries to encourage others to understand that look, there is a reward that's greater than anything you can achieve on this earth. And so he's not interested in the reward he could achieve on this earth.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, and that's something that right there a lot of churches are getting right, is the fact that they are living out their faith in a way that is authentic. And that's what people want to see. That's what people are thirsting to see. They want authenticity. Everything from... Guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're fine, Admiral, Ambassador. One thing I'd like to just throw in to expand on my point is, as far as churches and religion goes, I think what we'll find, if you really examine it, is the fact that a church like the Anglican Church, the United Church, Catholic Church, on a national level, is failing much more than they are on a community level. And I think if they could bring the efforts that they do on a community level to a national level, I think we'd see a lot different opinion of the church.
But that's a problem I think that's a problem that's inherent in the human condition, is that it's very difficult, the larger an organization becomes, to maintain that level of control over the organization, or at least to maintain some kind of integrity within the organization. And that's where, like, when you were saying earlier about smaller churches, I think that and this is actually kind of an interesting thing that Saddleback and experience in other churches that I've seen be successful on a larger scale have in common, is that they are not part of a superstructure of churches. Like, you know, Saddleback is an independent church.
Yeah.
Right. So Rick Warren founded Saddleback with a very core concept of, this is what I want to do. Right. And same thing with what Corey Tremble did with the Experience Community Church that I attend. And so these independent churches, if you have a singular vision that created this church, it's a lot easier to maintain control than over an entire denomination.
On that note, I would actually like to bring up the second article that I have. And I told you guys before we started, I had 6 tabs open. But the second article I have deals with the founder of the Calvary Chapel. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with Calvary Chapel, but it was founded by Chuck Smith back in 1966. And by 1967, he was bringing in hippies wearing Huarache sandals and bushy blonde hairdos and things like that off the beach. And they would sit cross-legged in the front row and listen and hang on every word he said. Mm-hmm. And the church grew from that point. He created schools. He created barracks that the kids could live in, so they weren't living on the beach. They were clean. They were safe. The church elders were the people that were like house fathers and house mothers in those barracks areas. And they went out and founded other churches. Now, here's a story that a lot of people don't know. Chuck Smith went and visited one of the Calvary chapels that was founded by one of the hippies that he had brought in off the street. And they started doing Pentecostal style church services where it wasn't structured, and he was not going verse by verse the way that Chuck Smith had been teaching him. He was cherry picking verses from the Bible to make a point. And Chuck Smith took him aside and said, "This needs to stop, or you need to take that name off of the front of the church." And he did that for the entire 60 or nearly 60 years, 50 years. He was the head of the church. He would travel around the world doing that. He said, "I put out the tenets that you are supposed to follow, And if you don't follow these tenets, then, you need to take the name off the church. So it's not impossible. It's just very difficult to be the head of an organization like that.
Mm-hmm. But then where, at what point does, I mean, like, and you guys know I'm a huge fan of expository teaching. That's what we do. And I do really appreciate that methodology. But at the same time, at what point does that become a dogma? At what point does that become a barrier to the church? Because because obviously nowhere in the Bible does it say you have to read each book in its entirety, right? You're not going to find a scripture that says that,
right?
And so, while it's a good practice, and it's a practice that I personally like, and it's one I appreciate, and I don't like the, as you say, cherry picking style of picking a verse here, picking a verse there to try and build a narrative for a pastoral lesson. I could also see the benefit in that. In certain circumstances, if you have, for example, like even Paul himself in some of his writings did exactly that.
He did,
and
he was a Pharisee of the Pharisees, and
mm-hmm.
he was capable of doing that. But this particular church was doing that in order to.
Oh, sure, I'm sure that if he saw a problem with it, and I'm not calling into question what was happening there. I'm just saying, at what point does it become, does a doctrine become dogma and become a barrier to what could be, true, authentic discipleship?
True. And in his own words, Pastor Chuck Smith said, if you don't like this church, guess what? There's one down the street. It's only a block away. You can go to that one if you like it. If you prefer that style of worship, you can go over there. The point I was making is he went to the people that were being ignored on the streets, the hippies and the surfers, and he brought them into the church, and he expanded that church into a worldwide organization. Now, do I agree with his followers? Well, the people who are running Calvary Chapel now, I don't necessarily agree with. But what are you going to do? It grows into a giant organization, and you got to manage it somehow. So you get managers in there to manage it, and then all of a sudden it becomes just another denomination instead of a spiritual movement.
Well, going back to what Anti-Tricker was saying about expository preaching, there are obviously different styles of preaching or sermonizing that you can do, and we learned this when we're learning homiletics or anything on how we craft and structure different sermons. And I think what you need to, I think something that the church is doing exceedingly well is they are looking at their congregation. Many denominations are looking at their congregation and saying, what is going to reach my congregation the best? Mm-hmm. What are they going to be able to relate to, and how are they going to be able to digest what the pastor is preaching? And honestly, the two styles that I prefer is one expository, and the other is narrative. And the narrative style of doing crafting a sermon is basically you're trying to bring the congregation into the setting in which you're talking about. One sermon that I did and everything for my homiletics class was actually on the fall of the walls of Jericho. And the overall thrust of the sermon is, and it might seem a little elementary, but it had an impact. And I think it's true when everything. It's something that we all need to be reminded of. We all will face obstacles in life, but if our faith is, I hate to use this terminology, but is strong enough, these obstacles will and can be overcome.
If our faith is strong enough, we can determine or discern if the teaching is proper. Here, that's the okay. This is not what I wanted to get into.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's an excellent subject, and
That's what you get for having four weirdos like us, man.
It may it definitely be an excellent subject for another day.
Well, okay. If you
dogma versus etc. Right now, I wanted to talk about what the church is doing for the community. So let's talk about outreach. Anti-Trekker, what do you think?
Well, I think right now, especially, outreach is more important than it ever has been, because the church is in a unique position to be able to help people that are struggling right now without having to go through the bureaucratic nonsense that a federal type system would need to. Right? I mean, you think about it, the federal government managed to give people in the United States a $1,200 check after months of deliberation. Right? Now, what happens if you're starving today? And that's where I think that the idea of the church ultimately, and under normal circumstances, is to obviously serve its own community first and then reach out to the greater community. But in times like this, we all, everybody who is able in the church should be contributing to reach out to the rest of the community, because there are a lot of people that are hurting right now.
Yes.
And a lot of people that are out of work, a lot of people that can't get even enough unemployment to get by. And, and even a lot of churches that are struggling to get by. And so we as a faith community need to come together to prevent churches from falling apart and to prevent whole communities from falling apart. And it's a daunting task, but we, better than anybody else, are equipped to do it.
And Rambling Canuck, you talked about the smaller churches that were doing more than the larger churches. You want to expand on that?
Sure. So in referring to outreach, like I know with my church, Augustine, which is my avatar right now, I mentioned this last week. One of the things that my church does very well is the outreach portion of it. We have a Monday to Friday program at our church where they open the doors and they have coffee and biscuits, and they allow people to come in. The minister is usually on hand in case someone needs counseling or counsel, shall we say. And they do that Monday to Friday. And most of the offerings that are taken during church service support that Monday to Friday program. And so the building itself, although it looks great in this picture, when you actually go into over the years, as you go into the main chapel, you will notice that the paint cracked. The building isn't as lavish as it used to be. And that's because most of the money that's made goes out instead of in. And one day it will lead to the closure of my church for 100%, because they're just not going to be able to afford the upkeep anymore. And I mean, every year there's a crisis. Whether a couple of years ago they were talking about it possibly closing because they needed to repair the roof. And as you can tell, this building ain't small. So it was going to take a considerable amount of money, and they actually managed to raise it. So they got the repairs done. But I think from what I've seen, especially here where I live, on a small scale, your smaller churches, no matter denomination, really doesn't matter. They tend to do the outreach where I think, especially when we're talking about instead of private churches like Anti-Trekker was talking about, but I'm talking about like United, Anglican, Catholic, the main brand name, shall we call them, for lack of a better term, they should be doing it. The head of the Anglican Church should be, well, we're donating this to Winnipeg Harvest. We're donating this to Calgary Harvest. We're donating this. And it should be public. They should be very public about it. Because right now, I feel that in order for the church to get a better rap, they need to be more... They need a better publicity, a better publisher. That's all I can say. Because right now they're, on a community level, like I said, there are people that will stay. Without that church, I'd be dead right now. And my church is one of those that have people in the very congregation that will say that to you. Without this church, I would not be here. And I think that message needs to come out, and people need to see that side of religion, that side of the church, and less of, well, you're gay, screw you, or you drink, go away. Or they need to see less of the church condemning things and see more of what the church actually does for the community. And maybe people would realize that if all the churches closed tomorrow, a lot of the programs that benefit those who cannot afford to eat every week would be drastically affected, whether they're believer or non-believer. And a lot of people don't think about that when they're saying, well, I don't care if the church is closed. Well, you should care. Whether you're Christian or not, those organizations are there and they're doing wonderful things within your community, whether you believe in them or not. And I think that's the message going forward that the church needs to promote more, and less about what they feel about what everybody's doing in their personal lives, and be more showing what they do in the community, and making that what people see, making that the headline, not
so
the opposite.
On that note, what do we think that the church should be doing going forward to repair their poor reputation within a community or within the media, and then also within the congregation itself? The ambassador, it's up to you. You're first up.
Okay. Well, as far as repairing the damage that has been done, everything, I'll speak to within a community first. I'll speak to a broader context in terms of what a church could do to reach out to its community to try and repair the rift, depending on what type of rift, anything. Just say, for example, if a church has been embroiled in a lot of back and forth about the whole issue of homosexuality or anything within the church, or wherever it stands on the church, or it's the church's stance on it, I think the one thing they need to reinforce and everything is this idea of, look, we can't condone what you do, how you live your life, but we most certainly do not condemn it, because Scripture says, judge not, lest ye be judged. And, there's a whole strew of verses I could rattle off and everything. But the biggest thing is it takes action to repair a rift. Words alone cannot do it. So depending on what the circumstance is for that particular church in that community, they need to address it, not just by words. Words can be a good starting point, but action needs to follow, and they need to ask the community, look, we know we have screwed up. We know we have done wrong. What can we do to regain your trust? Now, the sad part is there may be no way to regain trust, but there may be others who are willing to give that church a second chance and say, okay, we see that you're genuine. We see that your heart is in the right place, and we are willing to give you a chance, but you need to put your money where your mouth is. And that may not necessarily mean financial assistance, but it may take action. Now, as far as the broader Christian community and the churches that make it up, that's going to take a lot more effort, and I think it needs to be a lot more coordinated across the board. Because let's all be candid here. The modern church, its reputation has been badly battered by decades of scandal and criticism and just, I hate to put it this way, but bad PR. And unfortunately, because of all of these things, I don't know if there is a one-size-fits-all conclusion for this. There very well may not be. But I think the biggest thing that the church should do is, one, they need to present a united front and say, look, yes, the church, and I use the big C church has had its fair share of screw-ups, everything in its past and currently. But we still are here. We still are trying to do the Lord's will and work in this world, and we are still trying to be a positive force for the communities that we exist in. And all we are asking is for an opportunity to be heard, to share our message of what the gospel says, what we believe, and what we want to do to help our communities that we exist in.
Yeah. Anti-Trekker, your thoughts?
Well, I know that it's like judge not as a popular verse to say, but I think about the simple fact that Paul put it so eloquently in that, how in the world are we to expect non-believers to behave like Christians when they're not Christians? And so, one thing that and again, I know I sound like a broken record, but going back to Pastor Corey, I love the examples that he uses. Is he's like, when you see that person that is, we'll just say, obviously of a lifestyle that is contradictory to what you believe is the good and righteous and proper way to be, before you start thinking like a Pharisee, before you start thinking, oh, well, thank God I'm not that person, or anything like that, how about you walk up to that person and you offer to buy them a cup of coffee and ask them their life story? And you get to know them a little bit, and you become their friend, and as their friend, you become you begin to gain authority in their life to where you can speak into their life about these things, and hopefully, if the opportunity comes, lead them to Christ. How about we do that instead of looking at them because they look funny because they got weird hair or they got jewelry in places we think ought not be, and instead of freaking out about that and getting all worked up over superficial things, we get to know them a little bit, because we are ultimately all human and none of us are any better than any other. It's just that hopefully we Christians know better.
How dare you suggest such a thing? I can judge a person by how he looks.
Well, you go right ahead.
I'm gonna quote a favorite movie of mine. It's actually the quote is this: "A person who judges the group is a peewit."
Well, my favorite line from scripture on this topic is he without sin throw the first stone.
I kind of like the he without stones throw the first sin.
That too. But I need coffee, okay?
Sorry, I think we interrupted you, Anti-Tracker.
No. I'm all good. But honestly, I think that's ultimately, we just need to get over ourselves, get over our self-righteousness, and instead of judging that person based on our life standard, which is not an appropriate thing to do anyway, we just get to know that person, find out, maybe there is a reason that they are that way. Maybe they've been hurt by the church. Maybe they've been hurt by a family member. Maybe they've just been hurt. And maybe we can help heal that hurt a little bit. And regardless of whether or not we end up leading them to Christ or not, maybe, just maybe, they'll remember that Christian guy wasn't a complete dick.
Yeah.
That is any tricker, that is very, very true, because here's the thing. Scripture says it, I think it's, I forget exactly because I'm tired. It's been a long day. But I planted, someone else watered, but to God went the increase. That is the thing. And we've all hit upon it and everything. We've hit around the bullseye. We need to step outside of the walls of our churches, and we need to go into the communities in which our churches exist.
And I don't mean to cut you up, but I just had to laugh a little bit, because I was trying to figure out, VStar333 put a comment, and he's like, yes, I agree, Andy Trigger, speak into, not at, big difference the way I look at it, which I agree. But when I looked at the comment, because everybody calls me AT, I was like, speak into, not anti-trekker. What? I don't get it.
Not at.
Yeah. Especially since at was all caps, and that's how people tend to write AT when they're talking to me. So
anyway, as I was saying, we need to take a page from Christ's example. He didn't look at the person's condition. He looked at the person first and foremost. When the adulteress was thrown before him, and the Pharisees were trying to get him to condemn her. And of course, we know how that all worked out. But he looked at the person, not what they did. That's the biggest thing. We have to stop acting like just because we are saved that we are better. No, we are under the condition of grace, which is a gift that we did not earn, but that we accepted. And we are the embodiment. We are supposed to be the embodiment of that grace, of that gift. And we're supposed to share that gift with everyone that we encounter. That is one of the biggest things that every Christian and every church should be saying and doing. Because people are looking for hope. They're looking for sometimes a way out. They are looking for a light at the end of whatever pit or whatever tunnel that they are stuck in right now. I speak from personal experience of this. I had been at church for decades, but it was God through a pastor and a church that brought me back home and gave me hope, gave me a reason to carry on. It reminded me of who I truly was. I was first and foremost God's child, just like every man and every woman and child in this world.
Rambling Canuck, your thoughts on what you think the church should be doing?
Well, I think I've kind of touched on it. I really believe that no matter the denomination, what really they need to be doing is focusing less on dictating to culture what they should be doing and instead showing them what they should be doing instead of dictating it. Mm-hmm. I think that is something that if the church with a capital C could learn, and instead of condemning people right out of the gate, because the more walls you build, every time you condemn something, you're building a wall. Mm-hmm. And the more walls you build, and then you sit around and go, well, how come we're not getting a lot of people these days? Well, it's because you basically told them all to F off and you don't want them. That's why. So to me, I think what we need to start doing as a Christian community, and more importantly, the upper brass, shall we say, they need to stop the condemning of people, mm-hmm. and start, well, welcome, and now you see how we are, and showing what a Christian is and not telling what a Christian is I think something that the church, that would be the most important step for the modern church, is they need to stop telling people what Christians are or how we act or what it is to be Christian, and instead show it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Like I said, words are cheap, actions speak volumes.
And when I started, Sunday morning Bible study and Wednesday evening spiritual studies, and mind you, this is the last week for a couple of weeks where we're going to talk about Christians and the church. Next week we talk about atheism versus agnosticism and the difference and why those terms are so often interchangeable in our society today. So next week is a spiritual study versus agnosticism and atheism. So I just wanted to finish up this round here with what we thought the church was doing wrong, and now what we think the church is doing right, and what we would like to see the church do in the future. I read an article about what the churches have had to do over the last 6 months due to this virus. So the doors were closed, and all the streams are online now, so you can actually watch a church service online from your YouTube or your Facebook or whatever the case may be. See you later, Mountains of Elysium. Have a great night. No, I had this idea before. I just never actually got around to doing it. But this is my church now at this point. And I want to talk about different religions and different belief systems. So I'm really looking forward to the future of Wednesday evening programming for my channel. Sunday morning, of course, is going to be traditional. I'm not going to change anything up.
So do you put on like the proper black shirt with the white collar and everything?
Traditional for me. I grew up Pentecostal and then switched over to Calvary Chapel.
Dress shirt, top 2 buttons, unbuttoned, and pit stains.
I prefer the t-shirt with the pit stains, but yeah, same thing. I'll just stick with my avatar. Thank you. Sing a few songs, talk about a book in the Bible, and move on from there. So Sunday mornings is traditional Christian service, but Wednesday nights, let's talk about other stuff. There are other religions out there. There are other spiritual beliefs out there, and let's get it out there and understand. So I'm going to try and find guests who are like you guys. I know you're Christians. You're all online and outgoing Christians at that, which is why I invited you to these last 2. Of course, you're still welcome to come, especially, Anti-Tracker, you expressed that you wanted to be here next week for the atheist versus agnostic.
Well, I've spent a lot of time in the theist-atheist great debate, so to speak, on YouTube. So yeah, it's a subject that I'm passionate about.
And I'll be here as many weeks as you'll allow me.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Ambassador, you're welcome anytime, of course.
And I appreciate it. I'll be in touch with you, CC. I'm not saying no, but I need to if I'm going to be talking atheism and agnosticism, I'll need to do some refresher studies on those two concepts because it's been a little bit.
No problem. All right, last thoughts, final thoughts. Anti-Trekker.
Honestly, I think that, is the church doing things to help the communities of this country and around the world? Yes. Are they doing enough? Probably not. But the problem is that we all, as church goers, tend to look at the church as being the people that are employed at the church, and we don't stop to realize all the time that that includes us, and that we are obligated. If you accept that book that you call the Bible is true, then you are obligated to give the church your financial support, the support of your time, and the support of your efforts and your talents. And so please do, if you are a believer out there, please support whatever church you attend. The right church is the church you are willing to attend, the right translation of the subversion you're willing to read. And so spend some time in the Bible, spend some time at your church, and let's try to make this world a better place on the other side of this mess we call COVID.
Yeah.
Preach. Amen.
Rambling Canuck.
Well, I'll make it simple. I think what the church needs to do is they need to get a better publicist. And basically, as Christians, we need to take a deep breath and realize that you get a lot more. You get a lot more with showing what we actually are than condemning things we don't like.
Yeah.
And I really think as a Christian movement, we really have to get away from, just like in our fandoms, one thing that's killing that is the hate. The hate needs to go. And if it doesn't, then everything good is going to be gone.
And I don't mean to jump back in, but you just made me think of something. At least with a fandom, it's like, hey, it's just Star Trek or it's just Star Wars or whatever. But when we're talking about the church, we're talking about literally God and man, and the message is love. Why is there room for hate in there? I don't understand it. It's something that boggles my mind, is that there are so many hateful Christians out there.
I've been wondering that for 40 years, Anti-Trekker.
So yeah, it makes no sense. But anyway, it's like one of those things, because obviously you guys know I've been embroiled in a little bit of controversy with the fandoms this week. But to me, it's like, well, granted, yes, I'll pick a fight over, who gets credit for what and all that with Star Trek all day long. But that's just, I love Star Trek, but it's just Star Trek.
It's trivial.
Yeah, compared to your eternal soul, it means nothing. And yet I'm sitting there on my channel, and even though, yes, I know I've alienated some people, not intentionally, but I have, but talking about the fact that I'm tired of the hate in the fandom, and and it just kind of clicked there, Rambling, because it's like, and yet so many of us are willing to tolerate hate within the community of faith, and that makes no sense to me. So, sorry, I don't have a point. It's just something that just kind of.
Well, Anti-Trekker, you're right on both points, and this will be my final point. I'll wrap up my 2 cents. The church has, quite literally, and I hate to say it this way, but I must say it this way: the church and a lot of Christians have become punching bags that refuse, oftentimes, and I say this not literally but figuratively, to punch back.
Mm-hmm.
And the concept of a Christian that is willing to debate, that is passionate, and that is not afraid to say what people are not comfortable hearing them say is something that needs to happen. Because for too long, the church, and I know we're supposed to be meek, we're supposed to be all these things, but but Christ never said be a doormat.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of churches have turned into doormats. And a lot of Christians are the same way. I am not one of those. I am not a doormat. I will stand up for my faith and my freedom to express it. And if that offends someone, well, to quote a favorite movie of mine, then let them be offended. I would rather be authentic and speak my mind than be a doormat and a punching bag, just on the offhand chance I'm going to offend someone. Guess what? Christ offended a lot of people too. They were called the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but he changed the world, and the people that followed him and who do follow him are changing the world as well. To my final point, to the triviality of fandom and the importance of faith, fandom is something that we can use as a bridge to connect with people outside of the faith. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And to maintain the integrity of a fandom, we must be vocal in expelling our own worst actors within a fandom. They need to be exposed, they need to be called out, and then they need to be extracted like a weed or a bad tooth. That way, when we say we are part of X fandom, people will say, oh, you're part of this fandom, so am I. You have an instantaneous connection with that person. Being a part of a fandom can be your way of evangelizing a person, of saving their soul. It might seem trivial, this is true. But at the same time, being a part of a fandom can be a powerful evangelistic tool. And if we want these tools to be intact, then we must stand against hatred and negativity within it.
That is a very good point. I am not restricted to what we all consider the phantom. I have multiple communities that I interact with, and they all know what my name means: conservative Christian disabled veteran.
Actually, I didn't know that until you just said that.
Is that right?
I've been meaning to ask you.
Honestly, I did not know that myself. Now that you have told me, it makes perfect sense, and I'm the only one that knew that. I have even more respect for you, Mr. CCDV. So
you know what's funny? Because it keeps throwing me off because I keep thinking it's Mr. CCTV, like you're like, something that CC is, and then like TV, like it's a TV channel, but
closed caption TV.
Yeah, I couldn't. I was like, what is this? And I'm so thank you. I keep forgetting to ask you, and then I'm not talking to you, and I'm like, oh, I didn't ask him again. All right, so.
But that's yeah. So when my son and I created this name, I was like, what should it be? Well, the first thing I am is a conservative Christian. The second thing I am is a disabled veteran. Well, that works.
Okay, and as much as I love your name, CCDV, and I do, I just have to say it. Your avatar looks like a creepy Gerber baby food commercial.
No, you know what it looks like to me? Is okay, you got your creepy Gerber baby there right next to LDG.
Yes.
So it's like, yes, LDG brand baby food.
Different one. It's
pixelated.
Let's see. There you go.
And
See, now there you go. You need to use. Yeah, so I assume you don't call yourself the drunken philosopher anymore. I assume.
I do. I'm still a drunken philosopher. I just don't do it for Bible studies or spiritual studies.
Well, talk to Jitsi about doing a CCDV one for you. I'm sure he'd do that.
Ah!
And I called him Jitsi again. It's Yitzi. I keep
Yitzi.
Yes.
Yeah. No worries.
Yeah, at least you don't look like LDG in that one. So.
No, he looks like a muscle-bound Freddie Mercury with a worse mustache.
Hey, I like my handlebars.
Still creepy. I'll say two things I'm going to say to Thomas Potts and everything. I know you're wanting to wrap up here soon, Cece. One, your soul does have value. You cannot sell it. You're not Bart Simpson. And two, I love your acronym, Crazy Communist Deranged Vulcan.
That makes a lot more sense.
Although that's a contradiction in terms because, well, Vulcans can't be deranged, and, well, communists and Vulcans would not necessarily mingle.
It depends. Needs of the many. That is
No.
actually a communistic idea.
No. That line has already been perverted once by that piece of garbage movie and everything.
Now.
Transformers 3.
And back to the hate in the fandom we go.
All right, now let's just save that for the pub. and
That for the pub.
Yeah, so
All
do
right.
come join
Okay.
Life with Matthew's virtual pub if you're so inclined, where negativity is definitely not allowed. So we just go there to have a good
Oh,
time.
it's not negative. I'm not being negative. I'm just saying Transformers 3 Dark of the Moon was a piece of crap. And I hate the fact that they made Leonard Nimoy quote that iconic line from Star Trek 2.
But, you know, it's funny because when you said it was already perverted once, I was actually thought you meant that fan film. I can't remember which one it was, but there was a fan film that Nichelle Nicholas was in, and they quoted that line, and then she actually broke it down about how that's a horrible, horrible idea, because if the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, then that's an argument for communism and other oppressive forms of rule.
Yeah, but that wasn't Spock's logic there. What he was saying actually made more sense than communism ever will.
I know, but I'm just...
Oops. Oh, did I say that out loud? Communism.
But actually, if you think about it, the interesting thing is, and like even you go to one of Leonard Nimoy's other roles in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where, you know, which is a thinly veiled metaphor for communism.
Yes.
Where and with communism, the way it was portrayed in old cheesy sci-fi was always this emotionless, this, you know, everything is for the state. And in a very real sense, the Vulcans would be the ideal communistic society because they would be able to put their own needs aside and not feel bad about it.
That's true, but at the same time, it makes the Vulcans look like a bunch of buttholes, and they're not.
Well, in Enterprise they were.
In Enterprise, they were. Yeah.
Yeah, they kind of were.
They
But
did get soft
just because in Enterprise the Vulcans were TNG Romulans, but that's besides the point.
Don't even get the. Now we're going to get into some fighting. I hate
No,
that.
well, sorry. It turns out that since I like Lower Decks, I'm not actually a Trekkie. So
Apparently
That's a bunch of hooey. And I can say that as somebody who doesn't like Lower Decks.
Wow, he
That's
said
a bunch of
hooey.
hooey.
That's some pretty strong language from a Canadian.
I'm on a religious show. I'm not gonna anti-tricker. Give somebody crud for saying bad language on a religious show, and then somebody flowers it up and he makes fun of them. Well, I'll remember that. Oh yeah, which reminds me. Speaking of which, I got a bone to pick with you,
Which one?
anti-tricker.
Oh, anti-tracker. Okay.
I'm fresh out of bones. What's up?
On his stream, he mentions about going to see Yosef. He mentions about going out to UK. He mentions about going everywhere in the States to meet everybody in the States. Does he mention about coming up to Canada to meet his Canadian fans? Hell no.
I have to. I've mentioned it a few times because
Not when you were saying you were going to go all over the place with your Winnebago.
First of all, it's not a Winnebago; it's a Newmar. But
Whatever.
You ain't no Lone Star to me.
Hey, Canuck, would you like some lotion for that burn?
No,
I could get Jeff Dunn to smear it on you.
no, thanks.
Ooh.
All right,
Okay,
guys.
how about Brie Larson?
No. See, Canada got the ultimate joke. We sent you a Justin Bieber, and we won't be taking him back.
Actually, Justin Bieber doesn't bother me that much. I just ignore him like most people do.
Yeah, he's kind of like a rash, you know.
we
He,
like
he goes away after a few days.
We also sent you Celine Dion.
Oh,
Yeah.
you don't get forgiveness for seeing.
That's why the nukes are coming your way. I'm just letting you
Oh,
know.
you mean the creepy chick and everything who used to have a singing career? Now she makes weird pagan clothing for children.
Yeah,
Like I said, we sent her to you, and we're not taking her back.
No, you never sent her to us because we never accepted her. We just were like, yeah, okay, go sing your heart. We'll go on. We'll just ignore you.
All right. Thank you guys for joining me. I appreciate it. Again, next week is atheism versus agnosticism. Can those terms be switched out? I say no, but we'll find out next week for sure. All right, everyone, have a wonderful week, and I hope to see you Sunday morning for Bible study. If not, I'll see you tomorrow night for karaoke.
And you had to mention the Bible or the logic extremist on us.
All right.
How are
good
you
night,
extreme against?
all. Oh, Greg just showed up.
That hurts my head. All right, take her easy, folks. Wrap her up, Mr.
Always
CCTV.
happens. Good night, everybody.
See you guys later.